Thanks for joining us again. I'm Jennifer Fierro, your broad podcaster here in the Highland Lakes, joined by Art Dlugach, the voice of the Llano Yellow Jackets. In segment number 1, we wrapped up the Yellow Jackets' big win over Burnet. Now we're going to talk about the other end. We're moving back to Burnet County. We're going to start with the Burnet Bulldogs. After losing their first game of the season, 29-21, they are hosting a very lethal and very tough Brownwood team. And I'm going to tell you how I know that, Art, because I got a big, gigantic look at the Lions when they beat Marble Falls last week. 55-16, I believe, was the final there. And I'm going to tell you, Brownwood scored on every possession they had except for 2. When they fumbled the football, and then Marble Falls fumbled it right back on 4th and 1 when it looked like the Mustangs were going to go into the red zone and score. Marble Falls fumbled the ball, and the Lions picked up that ball, went about 73 yards the other way for a score. And then the only other time they didn't score, when they were in victory formation in the game. So they have a just superb junior quarterback named Ike Hall. Ike Hall is a dual threat quarterback. They run the spread offense, and he runs the zone read from the pistol. He is a tremendous runner. He can throw on the run. They have a lot of RPOs. They want him in isolation. And what is incredibly interesting to me, Ike Hall and the Lions didn't do anything offensively Marble Falls didn't know. The difference was that Ike Hall was able to complete the passes against the Mustangs that he did not complete a week earlier against Abilene Wiley in a 7-point loss in Lions Stadium. So I think that we will learn a lot about the Burnet Bulldogs this week. Again, they've got an up-close and personal view of the Brownwood skill players because Brownwood 7-on-17, which made the state tournament in late June, early July, that 7-on-17 was in Burnet in late May for the state qualifying tournament. By then, Brownwood had already qualified for the state tournament in 7-on-7. So the Bulldogs are very familiar with the skill players from the Lions. My curiosity will be how they handle the linemen. And again, if you read my preview about the Mustangs and the Lions, Brownwood has about 13 players that are 6'3" or taller. So I don't know how you counter that. I give Brownwood a lot of credit. That was a very motivated Lions team that walked into Mustang Stadium on Friday night. It was a team that wanted to make a statement, was playing a Mustang team that had got to 3 rounds of the playoffs in 2021, had gone to the playoffs the last 2 years, and they looked like they were ready for Marble Falls, wanted to play Marble Falls, was mentally and physically and emotionally into that game, and Marble Falls had some things go wrong for them that, frankly, we didn't see in week 1. Motion penalties, false starts, holding calls, things that offensively we didn't see against Conley in week 1 that we saw against the Lions in week 2. So I'll be curious to see what Robert Draper, the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach, how he has addressed that with the Mustangs this week, and then we'll see what they can do against Killeen Chaparral.
Talk about wanting to bounce back. And, we're talking about momentum. Do you lose it after you've beaten a Burnet team like Llano did? But when you've lost and lost badly, then you really want to show your stuff. And I think against Killeen Chaparral, they'll do it. I find it interesting that Brownwood goes on the road to play at Marble, then goes on the road to play Burnet. They could have just stayed here, maybe spent a week in the area and not have to do all that driving. I'm kidding, of course. But they do play back-to-back at Marble Falls and at Burnet.
Yes, I agree with you there. I am very, very interested to see what the Bulldogs can do and if they can do something differently. There is a strong belief that Davenport and Canyon Lake will take 2 of the playoff spots. And that means that there are 4 teams left to take the other 2 playoff spots between Marble Falls, Burnet, Lampasas, and Taylor. So I am curious to see what the Bulldogs will do. Think of it this way. I can remember when Marble Falls, I can remember when Texas played Arkansas in 2021 and how devastated as a Texas fan I was to see how Texas lost. Not that they lost, but how they lost, the manner in which they lost. And then 2 weeks later, Arkansas beats A&M. And now, as a Texas fan, I don't feel quite so bad. So I am wondering if I'm going to feel the same way if Brownwood does to Burnet what the Lions did to the Mustangs. I'll be curious to see what Burnet does. And I hate to say it that way, but I don't know how else to talk about that.
That's a really rough game for the Bulldogs.
On paper it is. And I'll be curious to see, because the one thing that I have seen from the Bulldogs, and I think you saw this too, I think this is a Bulldog team that might be a little beaten right now. And I don't mean on the scoreboard, I mean physically beaten. I think there's some nicks and bruises that they're fighting through. I think that they are asking some of their players to fill in spots because there's a need there. That they're trying to create depth in other spots, and that means shuffling players to different spots and positions that maybe going into each ball game, they didn't think they'd have to do that. So I am curious to see what will happen and how Burnet responds against the Lions, and then who's available. Because as you know, most coaches don't talk about injuries. So I'll be curious to see who they suit up and where, who starts and who's not starting, and then figure that out from there.
It seemed like, it didn't seem like Elliott Clark, a fine receiver for Burnet, was hurt in the Llano game and had to be helped off the field. Coach Green of the Jackets did not think he was hurt that badly, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I have not had a chance to talk to Brian Wood about that, and he wouldn't tell me anyway.
Right.
Every time Coach Wood and I talk, he sticks with the X's and O's. He gives me his comments about the ball games, what the ball games that passed, and then looks a little bit ahead to who's coming. And he didn't have to say much. Like I said, I got a very good view of the Brownwood Lions. Let's talk a little bit about the Killeen Chaparral Bobcats who are visiting the Marble Falls Mustangs. Ironically, you talk about interesting facts in Burnet County. Both Burnet and Marble Falls are having their homecoming games this week, I believe. So, with the Mustangs hosting the Bobcats head coach is a man named Alan Hare. Alan Hare runs the slot T offense. He learned it from the Bodies and Brian Herman and Jerry Vance at Liberty Hill back in the earlier mid-2000s. So that's his scheme. It is interesting to me because it'll be like Marble Falls is playing a mirror image of itself rather. On the other hand, Killeen has athletes. Their roster reminds me a little bit of what the Leander Grizzlies have. So they'll have speed, they'll be strong, you'll see a lot of height. Marble Falls faced that against Brownwood last week. That's another reason why I'm very curious to see what Coach Draper and Coach Herman come back with, because just talking to some of the players this week a little bit for the Mustangs, they were overwhelmed by the Lions, overwhelmed by them physically, overwhelmed by them, by their where they were emotionally. Like I said, that was a very motivated Lions team that stepped off buses.
Leander Glenn Grizzlies.
Yes. And that was the scrimmage in early August.
Yes.
I think the Grizzlies roster compares to what Chaparral will be bringing. The difference is that Glenn has run the slot T for 2 years. This is the first year that the Bobcats are learning the slot T. So I'll be interested to see, since Marble Falls runs that same system, this is year 4 for the Mustangs. What will the defense do now that they're facing a mirrored image of itself? Marble Falls didn't handle the Grizzlies well, in early August defensively. I'll be curious to see what they've learned a month later against the Bobcats.
Jerry Vance, I'm pretty sure, brought the slot T to Liberty Hill from San Marcos.
That was before my time.
Well, it was around 01, and he stumbled for about a year, and then not too long after that, 2 state championships.
Yeah, well, it is a highly successful offensive scheme if you've got the personnel to do it. You spend a lot of time in the weight room. There is no doubt about that. Okay, so that is all we have for segment number 3. We are going to go into our private schools and talk about Faith Academy and Smoking for Jesus. Those 2 teams are playing each other in week 3 at Faith Academy. 2 powerhouse 6-man teams. Cannot wait to get into that. If you want more about Burnet and Marble Falls, make sure you go to TexasChalkTalk.com. That's where you'll find all of the write-ups for Burnet County. And of course, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share the channel. Art and I will be right back. Segment number 3, we're going to be talking about Smoking for Jesus and the Faith Academy Flames.